I remember in February 2020, March 2020, I bought so many foreclosures on the courthouse steps, and I was flipping houses like crazy, making six figures at least every month in that business. In April 2020, the government said you can no longer buy houses on the courthouse steps. There's a foreclosure moratorium. So I lost millions of dollars a year in income overnight like that. Boom, it just happened. And I had to instantly pivot. I'm hearing a lot of whining right now from agents. I'm hearing a lot of people complaining. I'm hearing a lot of people in denial. I love real estate agents, and I love that my followers are real estate. So I hate saying whining, but I've also mostly seen a bunch of whining, and I've wanted to tell people like, hey, this is happening now. Stop complaining and start getting into solution. What have you guys seen or heard?
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another King's Table. We are fired up to have some great discussions today. Me and the fellas were just kind of mapping out some of the topics, and there's a lot going on right now. A lot of interesting stuff going on in the economy, a lot going on in business, a lot going on with investing, a lot going on in culture. So we're going to try and tap and touch as many of these topics as we possibly can today. We are down one, sadly, our Sultan of Sofas.
Dun, dun, dun. The Sultan of Sofas is not here.
Now we need another like soundboard, like or something that, encompasses the emotions and sadness I can see on your faces right now as Mike smiles with a big old grin. So first and foremost, we wanted to say thank you to all of our listeners. Every time I go over to YouTube and I look at, our subscribers and the comments, man, we started with none and now we're at 335 subscribers. We got more people listening on all of the podcasting platforms, leaving reviews, leaving comments. So many people, Debbie, are so glad you guys are back this week. This week wasn't the same, not having the episode that I can replay in my head all week. We had Hello Austin, Texas, Ari, great episode from Average Cost of the American Dream, Feelings of Perplexity with very old presidential candidates. We've got Turn Ogle, missed you guys last week, felt lost without you. I think this is one of the top 3 episodes from Cody. Michael Cater had some good questions about Bitcoin for when we decide to bring on our Bitcoin expert, Mr. Dan Nunney. So overall, we just want to say thank you. Keep the questions, the comments coming, post those down below. We want to make sure that we continue to lean in on the things that are interesting to you guys, our listeners, because you guys are the reason we do the show. So with that being said, before we dig in today, I know we're going to be talking about what's going on with the Fed right now. We've got, of course, Mr. Amuchastegui always tapped in on all things real estate and the big NAR news that dropped this week. We got Mike talking about some interesting stuff with peer-to-peer lending and just the evolution and disruption of certain industries that are going on right now. I'm going to share a little bit about the Lencioni Model, which is a very key model for building high productive and quality teams, accountability groups, organizations as a whole. So we got a good docket of topics to dig in on today. But before we do, I would love to know, what is the most challenging thing that each of you are working through right now in your businesses or personal life that really has your gears spinning and is challenging you in a way that you haven't been challenged in some time?
And are you saying like our listeners need to put that in the chat right now? What are the challenges? What are the things that's getting out there?
No, this is for you guys. I want to know.
I was going to be way happier if it was for the people to go put. I'm imagining people going onto YouTube right now and putting that on there. Like, put yourselves out there, people. Mikey, what do you got?
Mine's front and center. So while Aaron digs, because Aaron's money just solves everything in his world, so he probably doesn't have any problems. But I'm just kidding. I was telling the guys I was talking to you guys off camera. Like I'm like the busiest I've been since I launched my first business in 2004. And it was crazy. I mean, Inc. fastest growing companies in America. And I was young and a lot more naive then. And I was talking with Daniel Del Real, who's a mutual friend of all of ours, last night. And, he texted me and he said, "Hey, Mike, you've been on my heart. What's going on?" And I was like, I was telling him what I'm about to share with you guys. And he said, he made this comment. He said, sometimes just reconnecting and getting back to simplicity is like the most important thing. So I'm buying my partner out. So I've had a business partner since 2016. And it's been challenging, which I won't go into the details on why it's been challenging, but a mentor of mine once said that if two partners have the same strength, one of them is not needed, which is very true. If you look at a solid marriage, usually you're two different people and you complement each other. Well, it's the same thing in business, and we talked about this, I don't know, 10, 15 episodes ago, challenges in partnerships. And the problem with partnerships is that they're really good until something, is challenging. And by the way, my partner and I, like, it's amicable, but it's been challenging because some things came out, which again, I won't get into the details, but some things came out in our partnership that like literally just make it impossible for us to move forward from his perspective. And it's also good. And I think the lesson for me that I'm like learning through all of this is, usually when something is challenging and you can focus on the challenge or the bad, or you can really look at the good in something. And there's an old saying, if you're going through hell, don't stop. And I think the thing that's really where the rubber meets the road for me on your question, Matty, is like, it's challenging right now because I'm taking on his role and my role. But what's positive about it is that, we've needed to make some decisions and hire some key talent. And we haven't done it for a while and I think this is true for real estate investors, business owners. Like, there's probably a lesson in this because a lot of times people don't hire someone because of the salaries that they're taking. And, I'm reading Dan Martell's book again right now, Buy Back Your Time. And one of the things that he says in there is like, when you can't afford to make a hire is probably when you need to. But, whether the audience is like a independent owner, don't shut this off just because you don't have a business partner. Like, a lot of times we don't invest in key talent. We don't invest in our business because of the salaries that we're taking, or because, we're not taking salaries and therefore we can't afford to pay other people. Yeah. And I think the thing that this is really, so it's challenging in the early, it's going to be challenging the next few months because I'm taking on double role. Like, literally yesterday, I think sometimes, people look at entrepreneurs and business owners and think, oh, I wish they had their life because they see Aaron's, post out on Lake Austin on his boat. But I don't think they realize how hard Aaron works. Like literally yesterday, I started work at like 5:30 a.m. and went home at 10 o'clock at night. And I'm not even tired. Like, I'm so freaking energized. But the challenge in it is, and Aaron, you kind of alluded to this. I think the real challenge is when we're in this busy season. I think you were talking about this off camera. Mm-hmm. But the hardest thing about the busy season right now is taking on more when you're also simultaneously trying to do your, that saying of work on your business, not in your business, whether it's hiring, financials, all of that stuff. Really trying to navigate both of those when you're in a really busy season. I think that's the most challenging thing for me right now. Because I have a full work plate anyway, but then when you get in the weeds and you have to take on more, it's pretty challenging. And so trying to keep the ball moving on more longer range goals of like hiring an employee in the next 90 days or 6 months, or, strategic planning with lending and refinance and selling properties, and keeping your mind on that stuff when you're in the weeds is really challenging.
Yep. I agree.
Yeah. Like, it reminds me, I was talking to a guy yesterday about being an entrepreneur, right? And how in general, a lot of people say, I want to go be an entrepreneur because I don't want to work for anyone anymore. Right. And I was explaining to him that, like, entrepreneurs work for other people still. Your boss just changes and looks different. Mm-hmm. Your boss might be your investors, or your boss might be one of the clients that you sell for, or your boss occasionally could be a customer that you buy from. Right. Like, you are still, unless you are totally horizontal, like, unless you get wealthy enough that you're just a shareholder in like a company, right? Anything but a shareholder, your boss just gets replaced. And so, like, the idea of becoming an entrepreneur, to be your own boss and to be able to go get to do whatever you want. There are seasons of that and seasons where it is more challenging. And like Mike had said, if I went into like my most challenging thing right now, I met with a local guy in Austin, Paul, I think a buddy of ours, you guys have probably both met, Paul, and we're just kind of doing some brainstorming. It was like, hey, what are the different projects that you're working on? I'm like, well, I've got like this course that I have, and I have this mastermind, and neither of them are growing like the way that my inner circle, neither of them are growing as fast as I would like them to. So I'm not putting forth enough effort to have them grow, but they're like opportunities. Right. And I probably need a who for this and a who for this. And it was like looking over, my storage unit in Michigan that was supposed to have another 10 months in the account of bank funds, all of a sudden ran out. And I reached out to the operators and I'm like, hey, we're out of money 10 months early and we're not, we're not sustained yet. I'm gonna have to start writing a check every month. And they're like, whoops. Right. So I'm like, oh, so then here's a fire that I have to put out. That's something that should be horizontal. It should be something that like, no, I was an investor in something 3 years ago. And by now it was supposed to be paying me back money and the operator screwed something up. And now I'm going to have to be putting money in, and maybe I'm going to have to send my own team out to go take over operations because the operators can't. That's the nature of our business. But like, and it starts to go through all these different things that I've got. And then these new big opportunities. Like I have a couple really big opportunities I want to be focusing on, that if I could focus all my efforts on that, I'll be making a ton of money in that really soon. But then I have these other things in the meantime. I can't ignore the storage unit or it gets foreclosed on. Right. In the most ironic fashion ever. Maybe I should let a house probably go to foreclosure someday just to add to my big story of irony. But anyway, I think that when you have a whole bunch of different stuff you're working on, there's a challenge with that of going, I love it when I'm working on the stuff that makes me money, that's exciting. There's parts of our business, like my favorite part of my week is when I get to come on and record with you guys. I don't mind working a long day when that's going on. When we've got a long day of dealing with, lawsuits or employees that aren't fun, or aren't enjoying themselves, aren't having a good time, then those are the times when working hard isn't as much fun. But life goes on as we get to do this journey, and the partnerships are one of the most interesting parts of what we do.
It reminds me of a video that was sent to me this week that just totally resonated. And I think we've all heard that every level, has different devils, right? And
that's good.
And it's one of those things where choosing your hard, if you're somebody that wants to be an entrepreneur and you want that freedom and you don't want that boss and you want the ability to go and build a big lifestyle and bank account and impact and all that, there's a lot of hard that goes into that, right? And a lot of people think that, it'll just be easier not to have a boss, right? Or, if I do this, then life will get easier. And one of the things that I was thinking about was how, and this was for myself as well, how many times in life do we create a narrative that if I just do this, then it'll get easier. If we get through this season, it'll be easier, right? And the Duke women's head basketball coach, Kara Lawton, did a phenomenal speech, and I wish I could pull it up. It's a little bit long, but essentially, she talked about, one of the main things that most people do in life, knowingly or unknowingly, is they wait for things in life to get easier. And when you think about your own life, right, whether it's, I just got to get through, midterms and then school's going to get easier. I got to just get through this little financial, challenge and then life's going to get easier. Or once my kid gets past the terrible twos, then life's going to get easier. And there's this narrative that we have kind of become accustomed to of always looking for the easier in life. And what her speech really reiterated, and she said it so well, was that life never gets easier.
Yep.
Especially if you're somebody who has aspirations and goals and drive and you want bigger and better, life's going to get harder. Now, it's going to be a different hard, but at the end of the day, there's still going to be hard wherever you go if you want the best out of life, if you want the best out of yourself, out of your family, out of your marriage, out of your kids, out of your employees, right? It's going to be harder. And what she talked about in this speech was what happens in the most peak performers of life is they change the psychology and the narrative around easy and hard, and they just get really good at navigating the seasons of hard. You just get better at handling hard. And that's what happens, right? Most people think that it's going to get easier and therefore life's going to get easier, and it doesn't. And all of a sudden they become jaded and pessimistic and the victim mentality, versus the people who go, well, I got through this hard, and now I know there's another hard on the other side of it that I'm just going to have to be that much better at handling it when it comes. I'm going to be that much more battle tested, that much more financially, ready, this much more mentally ready, right? I'm going to surround myself with the right people. And so it just really got me thinking about, you're talking about being busy, you're talking about putting fires out, right? That stuff's hard. But you guys have really, over years of being battle tested, built up the muscles and the disciplines and the mindset that helps you get better at handling the hard stuff better. And so I just thought that was a really great message for anybody that's going through something hard right now, or that is trying to work towards something bigger and better than where you're at today. It's the people who struggle well, who handle hard well, that are the ones that ultimately have the right mindset, the right positioning, and the right purpose for getting through the hard in life. And that message really resonated with, what you guys are doing. And honestly, what I'm working through. I'm working through what I think might be my biggest and best commercial real estate deal I've ever put my hands on. And that's a lot of extra work beyond what I've already got on my plate. And that being said, I know that these seasons of hard are ultimately what transform me into being the person that I know I need to become in order to handle the next hard after that. So that was just something that resonated with me when you guys brought that up today.
Yeah. I think something about your commercial deal really quick to add is like, you also got to get while the getting's good, right? In our industry, like I've said before, like most of my big moves were like 3 different 1-year periods. And like when an opportunity comes up, like there will be times when we're not very busy.
Yeah.
Right. But when the opportunity is right, sometimes we're busy because we're problem solving and the problems are really bad. And then sometimes we're busy because there's this new opportunity. And if we focus on it, we've got, it's through the other side. But when opportunity knocks, like it's like, when is the perfect time to have a baby? I'm not ready. Like, when is the perfect time to get married? And they'll tell me there is no perfect time. No one is ever ready to have a baby. Like, that's probably like the best example. Like, you're never ready to have a baby. It just happens. And then somehow it happens. So like when the next opportunity comes, you're just a little bit busier during that time. So great way to start us off.
Yeah. As we move on, right. I think it just reminds me of that, the extra mile. It's not very crowded. And then when you think about, the easy bus that most people want to, tote them from one destination to the next, they just want it to be easy, smooth sailing, right? That bus is so crowded and overfilled, and it ultimately leads to nowhere. So if you're one of those people, right, that is looking for life to be a little bit easier, I'd challenge and encourage you to maybe flip that paradigm and go, I need to figure out where the heart is at and go run in that direction, because that's ultimately what's going to transform me into the person that's going to lead to the results I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So as we kick off today's update on Matt's Money Corner, I wish we had Ash here doing his little
Matty's Money Corner.
We know, shout out to Evan, who does such great engineering and production for us on the show, along with Tim and AJ. We've got some updates on the Fed, and it's fallen even more in line with Mr. Amuchastegui's prediction as of today. And I think right now, as we record this, Jerome Powell is still speaking at the FOMC, but the Fed has held rates and they are not cutting, which leaves interest rates unchanged as of right now. Powell went on record and said that inflation is still too high, ongoing progress is not assured, and the path forward is still uncertain. Yet the Fed still sees at least 3 25 basis point cuts this year, which I think at a minimum is what I said. I believe they're going to cut Fitch, which is the debt rating agency that ultimately rates all of the global debt, basically came out yesterday before the FOMC and said that They urged the Fed to cut rates by at least 75 basis points this year, or else it could lead to further challenges and economic issues. And today, the Fed essentially validated that that is essentially at a minimum what they will be doing, still seeing 325 basis point cuts this year, but they forecast fewer cuts than before in 2025. Now, again, this is a moving target. It's all going to be, based on what is coming on with the lagging data that ultimately drives the leading policy that we decide to, see come out of the Fed. But as we're seeing right now, the economy is still, quote unquote, very strong. And even though with some of the data showing some distress, mounting credit card debt, savings being depleted, people struggling paycheck to paycheck, we're still seeing inflation at a level that the Fed does not like, as well as a lot of the other data that is trickling in showing that the market is still relatively stable and strong. And therefore, they think that the cost of capital and rates need to stay a little bit steeper. What are your guys' thoughts on this?
When's the next meeting? Do you know when the next policy meeting is?
May.
Next one's May. All right, so it's official. First quarter cuts didn't happen.
Yep.
And man, yeah, it's easy for me to go, hey, I was right about that part. Like, we still got a lot of time left in the year, and we don't know if Matty's going to be right. Last week, we all got really bold and said what we thought was going to happen for the rest of the year. 9 months is a long time, so it's bold that we were making the predictions that we did. But it does go back to even just say against the news that was 6, 7, 8 months ago, people were acting on big news that now has officially become not true, because there were supposed to be rate cuts that were announced by ING and all these other places that it was going to happen first quarter, and now it officially hasn't. So, and even the next topic we get into after this one, I think we're going to see, like, it's not always as it appears with timing and things like that. So next one's in May. I thought that one of the most interesting quotes that I just saw in this, so this is on CNBC, and it is live right now as they're talking about it. Like, S&P is rocking though. So like S&P breaks above 5,200 for the first time. So like the Fed rate went up when they held rates. But they said our policy rate is likely at its peak. What is that saying? Like, they probably aren't going to get any higher than they are today. That's a little different than saying we're going to lower for sure, right? Our policy rate is likely at its peak. So they're saying it's not likely we're going to raise rates further, is what that statement was, if you read between the lines. And that's kind of an interesting, different play on words, because I would say most of the people that are reading the news or sending the news, they're saying for sure it's getting lowered, and the Fed's saying like, we're probably not going to raise again. And so it's just a little bit different swing, because I think if they said like, we're considering raising again, people would be like, what? Like, they didn't even think that was on the table. So it just goes to show how this Fed is acting. Man, they're doing a much better job than I expected with this whole kind of soft landing concept. They're probably playing too many of their cards out loud when they're telling people what their plans are, especially with the big cuts. So it said they're still, in one sense, the headline said, hey, they're still going to do 3 rate cuts this year. But I think it's just good they're being careful with the data. And I think a big part of our prediction, we had 2 things about the predictions last week was, one, I think it's going to be hard for them to lower rates because I don't think inflation is going to stay down until people really stop spending more. And if they keep releasing credit to people, then inflation's not going to get down yet, because people are just going to keep spending like they have the money. So it is like this catch 22. But the other point that Matt had last week that I thought was good was, yeah, but they can't keep rates this high this long if they don't want some sort of a crisis, but it doesn't seem to be affecting other sorts of businesses. So it's really interesting. I've been talking to a lot of business owners in just the last week that need lower rates too. Like, they're having trouble getting loans for their like restaurants and operating companies and things like that. So I would say, man, I wish today they lowered the rates instead. This is something I would love to be wrong about. But I think that it's probably a lesson to look back, and just like we thought, doesn't tell us much about what's going to happen the rest of the year though. But nothing's going to happen until May.
He also noted, Mike, before you respond on that, he just had commented that strong job growth is not a reason to delay rate cuts. And I think we have seen, strong job growth and or unemployment remain relatively low due to the fact that a lot of people are working two either full-time jobs just to make, ends meet, right? And so that data seems a little bit skewed, and he's kind of hinting at that, right? Just because economic unemployment and job growth has been strong doesn't mean that, that's a reason that they should not cut rates. What are your thoughts around what the Fed has done and what you might expect them to do come May, Mike?
Well, I just kind of want to back up and, well, I'll just address that. So I'm not an economist, but I don't think we're going to see much rate cuts at all. Like, and even at the year-end predictions and everything. And one of the things, so my brain is pretty simple at the end of the day. But if you look at the Fed's mandate, it's two things: to achieve maximum employment and keep prices stable. If you look at those two things, and if you just simplify this, there are so many of us that have been waiting and waiting and waiting for rate cuts. And what my brain keeps coming back to is if we see a substantial rate cut, or even any rate cut over a continuous period of time, look at how many people. I was talking to my mom the other day, and they just built a new house that I think they only have like $600,000 into it. They built it themselves. My dad's a contractor, and they're getting a loan on it they have like 400 grand into it now, completely, that they need to refinance out. So then the house is like worth $2 million or something. And my mom, I was like, why don't you finance more of that? And she said, well, the interest rate's high. And I was just like, they have so much equity in this house that they built. And she said, well, maybe I should just refinance, or maybe I should finance it. And then when the rates come down, I can refinance. And I was like, it doesn't matter which direction this goes, but yes, you should finance that, because even at 7% interest, like they're not dumb. They have multiple businesses. Like they could go invest that and make way more money. But it's just the mindset. And so even people that have financed their homes at, 6, 7, 8%, how many people have done that in the last 2 years? That if we lower interest rates, everybody's so excited for lower interest rates. I think what they're probably scared of is the minute that they lower interest rates, the freaking economy is going to turn on fire. And Aaron just addressed this. You look at the S&P 500, you look at job growth. I mean, the role is to achieve maximum employment, keep prices stable. If they cut interest rates, I think we're going to have a freaking just fury of activity that's just going to pump us right back up. And I think that that's what they're really struggling with, is not so much, they're not really up against an issue where they're like going to implode the economy, because we just keep printing more debt. And like I always say, it doesn't really matter. I think what they're concerned with is if they drop rates, how fast do they have to kick them right back up? Because spending just goes out of control. It's exactly what Aaron just said, but from, they're looking at it from one standpoint, like people are still spending money, and until people stop spending money, they're not going to cut rates. Well, if you look at it from the other perspective, if they drop rates, I think so much activity is going to happen in the economy that we're just going to be right back up to where they are. So my point in all of this is the new normal. Get used to it.
I think if the Fed would say this is the new normal, if they would actually just say,
right,
you know what, we don't expect rates to be going down in the next while. If they would just say like, hey, don't expect any change. Expect that this is the new normal for a while, that we're going to be right here for a while. With home loans, with other loans, I think the economy would actually go on a tear, because then people that are on the fence with stuff would stop waiting. There are people that are waiting to buy properties, buy houses, buy things, because essentially they're waiting for rates to go down. They're like, oh, I can afford this house, but if I wait 3 months and rates go down, I can get a nicer house. So I'm going to do that. Or there's a lot of us waiting, the uncertainty. I think the reason that actually some sales are starting to pick up and some businesses are starting to do a little bit better is because I think some people have decided like, oh, I guess nothing's happening. I guess nothing's changing. But the funny part is like, yes, if they lower rates, stuff's going to go on a tear. But I actually think if they just said, hey, we're not actually doing anything for the rest of this year, I also think stuff would go on a tear, and that would be safer than raising or than lowering and having it happen. Like if they just said like, hey, we're just going to keep it stable, then inflation is going to go up too. They said they need inflation to stay the bank target of 2. And they don't necessarily believe the data that they got last quarter last year. So They want to get better data.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting take when you put it that way, right? Of if they were to just plant their flag there and let the economy and everything that, would be affected by that ripple statement, it would really recalibrate a lot of things in a way that I think would actually solve a lot of the problems that they're kind of fighting against right now or concerned are going to happen as a result, but maybe just not as drastic. So I love that you brought that point up, and it's an interesting thought to think about. If they just said, because the market's essentially already baked in the fact that they're going to be doing at least 3 cuts this year, right? The economy in a lot of ways has baked into the fact that capital is going to get cheaper. I don't know how many investors I've talked to that are like, man, I really got to do something with my property this year, but I'm kind of just holding out because I think rates are going to drop. And so I still, right? So a lot of people are just in this stalemate of just going, I think they're going to do this. They've kind of alluded to the fact that they're going to do this. So I'm just going to hang on until I can. We've heard a lot of people say, survive until 2025, right? That's been a statement that I've heard thrown out in a lot of real estate investing communities, a lot of business mastermind communities. And so when you think about what is that statement prefaced on, it's prefaced on the fact that capital is going to get cheaper and the Fed is going to ease some of this, restrictive tape that feels like is wrapped around our capital markets. So if they did that, that would be very interesting. Will they do that? I'm of the camp that I think they're still going to cut. And just as they've done over the course of the last few years, which a lot of people made a lot of speculation about a hard landing and then no landing, then a soft landing, right? They've done actually a pretty damn good job of finally threading the needle in a lot of very tight windows. And I think that's kind of the game they've decided they're going to have to play. But if they did that, it would be really interesting to me to see, one, how much easier that would make things for them. And two, what the economy would do in response to that, which I think would not be as destructive as many people think if rates were to stay at that level. So good topic of discussion there. Shifting over towards our favorite Chinese application, TikTok. And there was obviously a lot of discussion around this over the course of the last few weeks, right? A lot of people who just, I don't like China, screw CCP. And the fact that this is a Chinese owned app and they're polluting, the minds of our youth and they're collecting all of our data and violating our privacy. And everybody was all up in arms about it. But then when people started leaning in more around really peeling back the layers of this problem and this, this TikTok onion, a lot of people started going, well, if the government can decide, who they can quote unquote protect us from. And it was kind of funny, right? They're not worried about Chinese buying all the land up. They're not worried about the Chinese doing all of these other things that the Chinese have kind of been ousted and shown to be doing that is somewhat negative towards America. They really honed in on TikTok and free speech and free form of expression. And ultimately, what a lot of people are now concerned about is if they can do this with, TikTok, what says they can't do this with any other app or platform inside of the United States, whether it's owned by a national or a foreign entity as a whole. So there's been a lot of data, a lot of discussion, and some progress around this topic of the discussion. What have you been seeing and tracking, Mr. Amuchastegui, around this topic specifically?
I love the news on it right now because it's just, I think we chatted a little bit about it last week, or maybe it was off camera, about how a hostile eminent domain government takeover of an app is in one sense ludicrous, and it probably prevents it could prevent other companies from coming in. But all the Googles on it right now, it is the hot topic, and it's like senators and stuff are talking about it way more than they're talking about stuff that I think is more important to me. Who cares about TikTok? Maybe there's way more to it. To me, it's an example of the government using fear and trying to make so conspiracy theorist sounding, but trying to get the attention to be diverted from the important stuff over to this and be like, hey, TikTok is spying on you. China is spying on you. We need to do this for the American people. And even though whoever's getting to buy it is going to make a bunch of money. There was news today of like the first companies that started making offers on it. But if you Google it, there's like articles that are like, wait, is TikTok really Chinese? From CNN. Another one says from Voice of America, TikTok owner essentially is a subsidiary of the Chinese Communist Party. Another one says, what to know about the TikTok bill that passed the House? If TikTok is banned in the US, might it be okay? I've also seen people are like, I hope you ban TikTok because I'm addicted. I've heard other people say, what are we going to do? Or like what company takes over? Like does Instagram just change a product over into like Reels that becomes more TikTok-like? Marco Rubio says forcing TikTok to cut ties with China is a big deal, and people have legitimate questions as to how and why. And Marco Rubio, obviously, he was a Republican presidential candidate, and he's kind of calling it into question. But it almost feels like I could have seen him being. I love Marco Rubio. I've got to meet him a couple times. I got to meet him at like an event out in Maui years ago as a normal person. But I think that I kind of just feel like people are just using this to like talk their own book or like to get their attention or like get their time out there because of how many people are focused on it. I feel like Marco is saying like, hey, we shouldn't be doing it in this, but he's also of somebody that if I could also see him on the other side of that, right? Like it would make sense to me if he was on the other side of it too. So it just feels like it's politics and time getting wasted. Maybe the most important article said China doesn't care. So the company and its foreign investors will lose out, but like Beijing has plenty of options otherwise. So if they use, other than accusing the U.S. of bullying, Beijing has not threatened retaliation or escalated their anti-American propaganda. But it really just said they may not lose much even if Congress does pass the bill, and they could even gain from some sort of a divisive battle if it gets signed into law. So I don't know. Doesn't seem like they're very scared. Is the deadline this Friday or something where they're supposed to, like the TikTok sale deadline? I think it's close. So anyway, I think the news is just really interesting. Oh, they have House TikTok bill gives ByteDance 6 months to sell. So 6 months is a long time. The almost election time when it happens. So I mean, I think it's worth talking about. I think the idea of government and eminent domain over companies, the scary line that gets tiptoed over, I think Americans are probably okay with it if they're like, hey, if it's 100% owned by China, then go ahead and take it if you think you should. But that's like one step closer to saying, Matty, I don't think people like you should own commercial stuff anymore. I think the government should own it. We're going to go ahead and take it through eminent domain because you're spying on your people or because you know too much about you get everybody's social security number. It's just a fine line.
It is
to where it steps further. And I don't think government should take companies.
I want to hear what our libertarian, Mr. Mike, has to say about that, because I agree, right? It's a slippery slope. You start doing that, there's plenty of data and always a narrative to support whatever angle you want to put forth. And you start giving government authority to do it, especially in this capacity where it's a charged topic around China, right? That's just one step closer and more permission for the government to lean in. What are your thoughts on it, Mike?
I'm hearing Pink Floyd playing in my head right now. Like it's just big government at the end of the day. And I get it, like from a security perspective and all the above, but it actually scares the living heck out of me. And sometimes when we get into a conversation like this, or when we think about an issue like this, I feel schizophrenic. Like I actually, over the last couple of weeks when I'm thinking about this, I'm like, China shouldn't have access to any of my data. Well, when I really come down to it, I don't want anybody to have any access to any of my data. But the reality is the minute that we sign on this phone, whether it's Facebook, Google, TikTok, it doesn't matter. And so then I literally feel schizophrenic because I'm like, I get it. Like if there's a couple anchoring thoughts for me, and we talked about this last week, but it's the fact that if anything, if we can't have our social media, our companies, all that stuff in China, then that's maybe my anchoring point, where it's like not even really a security ban, but like, hey, if you're not going to let us participate, we're not letting you participate. That's the only thing that in all of this that I've seen and read and heard, That's the only thing that really resonates with me as far as like the government getting involved. I just think this opens up doors to so much more control for the government, which, you know, is concerning to me in the long run. But again, I think the minute that we sign into any one of these, if we think that China can't watch what's going on in my life without TikTok, then I think we're pretty naive. So I don't really think it's about any of that. I'm pretty sure if a China hacker wants my information, they got it.
Yeah.
And honestly, when you look at a lot of the sovereign wealth funds of global capital all around the world, they are heavy, heavy shareholders in Apple, in Tesla, in Google, in Facebook, in Instagram, right? So to sit here and act like it's a threat because it's China, we have let China infiltrate so many different facets of our economy and our, you know, country as a whole. So to use that as kind of the reasoning that they're there to protect us and protect our youth, and because it's a CCP owned company, I think is pretty silly. And honestly, I think it's just a smokescreen that gives them, you know, a little bit more permission and latitude to lean in and overreach in maybe some other areas. But when you think about Facebook and Instagram and their algorithms and how much junk they're putting into, you know, the minds of our youth, right? Like those, a lot of the arguments that people are using, essentially, like you said, Mike, is what I'm getting, you know, thrown out the window. Versus maybe there are some valid concerns here, but I don't know if that is enough to validate what path they're moving forward on. I ultimately don't think it's going to get signed or passed, but it will be very interesting to see how this plays out. I want to wrap it up on this particular topic. If Tim, you can pull this this video up of Gary Vee, because the CEO of TikTok came on and said, hey, the government, if they get rid of this, they're getting rid of hundreds of thousands of creators and jobs and people that ultimately create livelihoods in the US off of TikTok and where they garner and harness attention. And I thought it was really interesting. Gary Vee's always on the front line of where attention is going and how you can position yourself to align it with your goals, whether it's your business, a personal brand, whatever it may be. And go ahead and play this, Tim, and we can hear what his thoughts are if TikTok were to get banned.
If TikTok gets banned in America, it's actually a good thing for us because everyone's going to be confused where all the attention goes. I'll give you a bigger one. Forget about TikTok. If all 9 social networks disappeared tomorrow, I would be thrilled because the attention has to go somewhere. I'm not emotional about the distribution product. I'm emotional about common sense and attention. Social media just happens to be the place where the attention is now. If this was a 1968 conversation, I would be screaming at the top of my lungs about how important television commercials are. Anytime there's a shift of attention, we have grown.
So he just kind of went on, right, to talk about, I just thought that was so interesting, right? As it can be, when these types of disruptions happen, there's massive opportunity. And I know you're going to give us a quick little update on NAR and the disruption that's happening right now in real estate and how there's so many people that are like, oh, this is terrible. Let me complain about it. Let me cry and whine and poor me and blah, 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 blah. And then there's a lot of people that are going, this is awesome. There is a total disruption happening right now. And in disruption, in a shuffle, in chaos, that's where opportunity, you know, and that time to capitalize on presents itself. So I'm just curious on any thoughts on that video, and maybe that can lead us over to some NAR updates and the transition, the disruption, the evolution that is happening right now in that space of the real estate industry.
It's just so interesting to me what we get focused on. Did you guys, I don't know if you guys watch Tucker Carlson or if you subscribe to his channel, but he had a guy on a while back called Brett Weinstein. And they were talking about the Darien Gap in Panama. And what was really interesting about this, because there's all these immigrants that are coming through the Darien Gap and getting into Panama, and Panama's actually letting them in. So they have camps there. But just to narrow this down, one of the points that Brent Weinstein brought up was that as they were going through this tour, there was actually a camp there that was a nicer camp that they couldn't get into, that was all Chinese people. And he was talking about, you know, there was some speculation on this too, but the interesting thing about the whole Darien Gap in Panama, so they actually have buses in Panama that they load all these immigrants on, and drive them through Mexico, and they're letting them through the border. Now, what was interesting, and on this point with TikTok, there's an entire camp there of Chinese nationalists, an entire camp of Chinese people, and they couldn't even, like, they asked him Tucker asked him, like, how many do you think it was? And he said, well, we couldn't even see because they wouldn't let us in, and we don't know how far back it went. And he didn't want to speculate. But like, if China wants, if China wants in our country, like, okay, we're going to shut down, we're going to ban them from owning TikTok, but we're just going to open up our borders and let thousands of, a lot of times we're talking about, people coming through. It's always about Mexico because obviously that's the border. But the reality is, like, we get on these, trains where we're China bad. And yet you have thousands of immigrants coming through China that are infiltrating our country. And we're not scared of that. We're not worried about that. And so it's just like, I just don't get it. Anyway, I hate the government.
I believe in the free market. Right?
Yeah.
No, I believe, like, I am from my very first economy class I ever took, like in college, and just being like, no, I am a true believer that the world is a better place when there are no outside interruptions, and you let people choose what they want to spend their money on, and you let people choose how much they should be paying for things. And I get the arguments against it, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and but I was poor when I became a believer in the economic system.
Yeah.
Like, I had no money when I first studied that and thought, this makes sense to me. Like, there shouldn't be any intervention at all because it changes the way things are worth. And then it puts false values on things and it creates all sorts of, different stuff. So I think that, so I think that I hope the whole policy doesn't go through. There's different things that make it happen, but I just think government intervention in business is bad. But I also know that we pay taxes for military and all sorts of stuff. So I'm not an anti-government thing, but I think business should stay out, or government should stay out of business. And I also think it's really unique in the sense where, Gary talked about that, where it's like, no, that it should get shut down because it's going to jump around and something else will come in if it gets replaced. But I do think if it happens and the US creators then lose, some people make millions on TikTok, right? And I don't think they have a pivot. I can think of a few in particular that they make all of their money because of who they are on TikTok. And it doesn't jump to this. It doesn't carry the same on Instagram. It doesn't carry the same on Facebook or on YouTube. They're on TikTok. They have followers. They make millions. If TikTok gets shut down, they go from being millionaires to nothing. It's a sad thing for people to think about in their businesses when they base it on something. But at the same time, like, if it worked for TikTok, you could tell them all forever, hey, you should have a backup plan. But they don't always have a backup plan because that's just what they're good at. There's some things we're good at. I'm going to jump over to the National Association of Realtors stuff really quick because I think it's similar in that sense that the rules of the game can change sometimes. And sometimes it's not fair. And sometimes it's unheard of. And sometimes it isn't. And sometimes you can act on it or not. We don't have to go into it a ton today, but we talked about it a few times a few months ago, the realtor lawsuits that came out. And really at the time of why I thought they were legally valid, although I thought agents wouldn't really like it, in the sense they said the NAR was colluding. They had a variety of reasons to say it, but essentially they said realtor commissions should be negotiable, but they aren't. And so we are going to try to decouple the way that commissions are paid. And I've seen a bunch of people post, no, they've always been negotiable, but have they really? Like, they've always been negotiable, but if an agent told you, I will pay you 0.5% to list your house, you would say no. But and the reason is because nobody's going to take it for 0.5%, so they're going to pay you too. If it truly was a free market and a free open market, like, you would take the listing would be negotiable because they essentially agents wouldn't be in collusion to say, no, let's all hold tight at 2% because then nobody's going to get paid less. So whatever arguments you guys want to put legally, I will put my flag in the sand and say legally it's valid, legally it's correct. Morally, I don't like it. I don't like the change that's going to happen. So that long story short, lawsuit came out. The lawsuit wins, says commissions are going to have to be decoupled. And for the last 4 or 5 months, people have said, hey, it's not going to affect our business. It's it's a nothing burger. It's going to be business as usual. 2 weeks ago at my mastermind, I told people, hey, this is happening. I had the agent head in the sand image. I think I showed you guys last week. You don't want to have your head in the sand as an agent. This is happening. But I also told them, be ready to pivot. Do what you can do now. Like, do what you can do now. But in the next 2 years, I think this is going to become final. I don't think it's going to happen that quickly. I was actually surprised by that, in the sense that now what happened this week, the Realtor Association sent out an email to people March 15th, 9:30 in the morning. That's how most brokers found out. And they said, hey, we've settled the lawsuit. We're no longer going to appeal it. We were actually going to have to file bankruptcy in order to appeal it. So we have now settled the lawsuit for $418 million. And as a result, there's a few kind of key things that are going to happen. And I'm not going to go into the details of all of it. I've got a longer podcast on the Real Estate Rockstars about that. That's probably more appropriate to really go into it. We want to go just the broader stuff that's going to affect everybody. But they did a settlement so the NAR would be released from liability nationwide. And so it would kind of help, cover people so no one else keeps getting sued over it. That was one of the biggest things, the release of liability. Second was compensation was moved off the MLS. You could no longer say on the MLS that you were paying a buyer's agent commission and for how much. Which is funny. You can put it on Zillow, though. So if you're a Zillow premium, you could still say, hey, we're going to pay a buyer agent commission. But it's going to be negotiable between a buyer and a seller, too. So any commission agreement, a buyer and a seller will have a right to say, like, no, I don't think that you should be doing that or not. There's also a settlement payment, as part of that. But there's essentially, it said there's going to be 3 ways that buyer's agents can still get paid. One is a fixed fee commission paid directly by consumers. So a buyer could say, buyer's agent will now have to do a presentation to their buyer and say, hey, I should be the one to show you houses. When we do that, here's the thing. I'm gonna get you in and out of the houses. I'm going to guide you. I'm going to talk to the sellers. As a result, you're going to pay me $3,000 to do this. There is a chance that the buyer, the other broker might share some of his commission with me. But to show you this house, you're going to pay me $3,000 for this. But this is what I'm going to do. They're going to have to provide value up front. They can also get paid through a concession from the seller, but now both the seller and the buyer see. The buyer will now see this when the seller says, like, well, raise your offer to 203 and then I'll pay 3,000 in concessions for your agent. And buyers are gonna be like, wait, I want it for 200, Mr. Agent. Why don't you do this for 1,000 instead of 3,000? And it also says, or a portion of the listing broker's compensation. The DOJ still has to approve this settlement. The National Association of Realtors hopes the DOJ approves this settlement because the DOJ wants to remove that last option. The DOJ wants the only option to be fixed fee commission paid directly by the consumers to the buyer's agent. They don't want those other 2 options to even be on there. So, but if the DOJ approves this one, then it's good. Hopefully by trying to come up with a settlement, they're going to have it. Moral of the story is, and I remember in February 2020, March 2020, I bought so many foreclosures on the courthouse steps, and I was flipping houses like crazy, making 6 figures at least every month in that business. And April 2020, the government said you can no longer buy houses on the courthouse steps. There's a foreclosure moratorium. So I lost millions of dollars a year in income overnight like that. Boom, it just happened. And I had to instantly pivot. I'm hearing a lot of whining right now from agents. I'm hearing a lot of people complaining. I'm hearing a lot of people in denial. And I think it's just one of those reminders for people like it's good. Same as a TikTok influencer. Tomorrow anything can be taken away. If you are going to do a business, any sort of business, even an employee, like at any time, the rules can change and you got to try to have the best attitude you can, adjust for the new rules. And the absolute worst thing you can do is say nothing's going to happen and not change. I think there's going to be a lot of businesses that come in and disrupt now. I think there's gonna be a lot of tech around it, but I know that, I guess, what do you guys think about it? Is it worth chatting more about, like, the particulars we get into and other stuff? But have you seen just an absolute ton of, I love real estate agents and I love my followers that are real estate. So I hate saying whining, but I've also mostly seen a bunch of whining, and I've wanted to tell people, like, hey, this is happening now. Stop complaining and start getting into solution. What have you guys seen or heard?
Well, what I think is crazy, and I might be out in left field on this, Aaron, so just, feed me some insight.
I'm ready.
Usually it's the extremists that, have these viewpoints. And so, yes, to answer your question, I've seen a ton of whining and, and positioning from, real estate agents. What I haven't heard a lot of is the people that this actually impacts, the home buyers that are like, yeah, or no, or this is going to save me so much money. I don't think it's going to save anybody money on houses. Like when you talk about the free market, like houses are going to transact. And I don't really think, like, the whole premise of this thing, like, oh, it's not fair to the buyer because housing prices are inflated because brokers are bad and real estate agents are bad. The only people I'm hearing anything from are real estate agents, which I understand why. We got to get ahead of it, and not we, because I'm not a real estate agent. But I actually don't think it's going to change home prices. Am I wrong?
I have a response. I want to hear Matty's stuff first before I jump in.
I am very interested to see how this continues to play out, because I think this is a healthy disruption to the real estate industry and is going to force everybody to bring more value, which at the end of the day, every industry thrives on who brings the most value. And so I think it's going to eliminate a lot of the part-timers and the people that were actually tarnishing the industry in a big way and giving it a bad name. And I think it's going to create massive opportunity for the people who are actually really good at what they do to, like you said, recalibrate based on what the rules of the game are now and to re-engage what that strategy is. And it made me think of two different types of stress that I'm seeing right now in the real estate industry. And these are for professionals specifically: eustress and distress. If you're not familiar with what eustress is essentially a good and healthy stress that makes you better. It doesn't happen very often. It doesn't last very long, and it motivates you to take positive action as a result. Distress obviously leaves you worse off. It's chronic, it's ongoing, it lasts a while, it's demotivating, and it ultimately moves you in a bad direction. And like you said, Aaron, I think whether it's TikTok, whether it's your business, whether it's being a real estate professional, whatever it may be, we should all always have some healthy level of paranoia that says this could change at any moment. Just like when COVID hit, right? The people who leaned into this and pivoted quickly and said, I can't change this. I just got to figure out how to take what the rules of this new world, this new game, this new industry is, and figure out how do I win and survive in this. That was a eustress approach. And then there were the people that were running around with their hair on fire, batten down the hatches, living in isolation, wanting to bury their head in the sand, and they were distressed, and it became very destructive and problematic for them in their life. So I think whether it's this, right, in the real estate industry, it's COVID or some global event happening, it's TikTok being banned, or Instagram shutting down, and you lose all of the access to your followers and the people. You always have to have that healthy level of paranoia that keeps you planning for the worst, executing for the best, and ultimately leaning into the eustress that forces you in those moments of chaos and shift to just perform at a much higher level.
Yeah. Be first, right? Like be first. Someone is going to get rich in this. Someone is going to come up with the perfect buyer presentation. Someone's going to come up with the a la carte service. Someone's going to be willing to figure out, hey, through tech and this, like I can be a buyer's agent for $1,000 each, and it's better than that. And people are going to jump in. So if I was going to think about it from a piece that makes sense, will it lower prices? No. If I'm going to think about it as a pure economic purist, which I am, I think it is going to lower prices a little bit. Why? I remember getting offers from people that would call me or email me and say, hey, you have your house listed at $300,000, but I'm not coming with a buyer's agent. Can I get it for $295 or $290? And all I'm ever looking at is I'm taking what is the least net I'm willing to take today. Whether they say, I want 280, I want to buy it for 280,000, or I want to buy it for 300,000 minus 20,000 in concessions. The only number I care about as a seller is my net. I want to net 270,000 on this house. I don't care how much I'm paying in commissions. So in theory, I do 100% believe that overall commissions are going to be less. That by making it negotiable, by making it between the buyer and the seller, by buyers actually seeing, you know how many agents wouldn't show houses that said 2.5% instead of 3%? A lot, right? Like not supposed to, highly illegal. Agents talked about it even on the podcast. That was a habit they would do. They were only going to show houses that were 3% buyer commission. Well, that's illegal. And you were showing now that they're going to have to show whatever, they're not actually going to know what the commission is until ahead of time. And it might even be so much tougher to transition it. Like a seller can pay it through concessions, but a seller can still only do 4% concessions for FHA or 6%, whatever it is. Like people are going to get maxed out. So I do think no matter what, commissions are going to be smaller. If right now the average commissions per house are 5%, I think average commissions on both sides are going to be about 3% within 9 months. I think it's going to be pretty fast acting. And so I think that goes back to the seller. So the seller, again, I just want a net 270. I don't care if I'm paying. So in theory, the buyer will be able to buy the house for a lower price, but they might have to put more money down, right? Because they won't have the same concessions, or they might have to pay their agent also. I think a lot of times buyers are going to go straight to the listing agent. Listing agent's going to have to do both sides, but someone will find a way to get rich on it. That way that it's going. So the pure economist in me says prices will come down a little bit on houses because commissions are going to come down. And if all things being equal, prices will cost 2% less for that first, 6 months of it, which isn't a significant anything. But it's mostly just a good example of you can have an industry that's been the same way for a lot of years and they can change it. But it's also not the end of the world because it's been like that in Australia for a long time. It's been like that in Europe forever. And it's been like that in US for commercial forever. It's not a nothing burger, but it's not the end of the world. And I do love that it's going to get rid of agents that aren't awesome.
Yeah,
Mike, what do you think?
Well, just back to Matty's point, and I'm just looking at it from a consumer perspective. So my house is listed on the market. We've got an agent, obviously, that has listed the house, and there's a lot of value to that. I mean, the marketing, the packets, and on the seller side, yeah, I get it. My wife and I mean, more than I even want to. I've been going to open houses. We haven't asked our agent one time to show us a house. And my wife has this list of houses that she saved on Zillow. And I've been through more houses than I even want to say in Austin, just trying to figure out what are we looking for? What do we want to buy? And have never once asked an agent for anything. And I know the way this is going to play out. When my house sells, my wife's going to have a short list of 4, 5, 6 houses that she wants to go see in certain neighborhoods. And, under the current way that things are, we're going to ask our agent to set up an appointment because that's what we need to do. I mean, obviously we wouldn't have to. We could call the seller's agent and ask them to see the house. But when this changes, it's going to complete, like for me as a consumer, will I use a buyer's agent? No. Why would I? And I know there's people that, maybe don't know how to negotiate or are scared to negotiate or whatever. All the arguments that I'm seeing from the realtors, you're going to pay more and blah, blah, blah. But the reality is like, I don't need a buyer's agent as a consumer. And I know a lot of agents are going to, tell me all the reasons why I do, but Zillow is all I need to figure out what house I want to buy.
Yeah. And as a result, you'll be able to offer less than the next guy. And the seller's if dollar volume's the same, if your offer is the same, they'll take the one with less commission. Or if your offer is 1% less than theirs and they're trying to get a 5% commission, yours gets accepted. Like it will lower your purchase price by being able to rep yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's always been one of my value adds when I'm going direct to a seller. Hey, we'll pay the closing costs, no commissions whatsoever, as long as you and I can agree on terms and a price and a structure.
That's why it's not big of a gap to tell me what's going to lower prices because we've been doing that forever.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Great point. Well, as we shift to maybe some final topics of discussion, Mike, I know that you have, really dug in on the hierarchy of needs and, interesting thoughts and takes around this topic and how it applies to us as humans, as leaders, as business owners or investors. What comes to mind when you were leaning in on this discussion around the hierarchy of needs?
I've shared this. Actually, the first podcast that I was ever on was with a guy. It's kind of funny thinking back to that because it wasn't that long ago, maybe 2018, 2019. I got on a podcast with a guy named Buck Joffrey, and I talked about manufactured housing and affordability and the need for, affordable housing in 2018. And it was interesting because he named the episode Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs and how it applies to real estate. And it's just really opened my eyes for a long time. Like I kind of look through when it comes back to like what Aaron was talking about earlier, the free market, and this applies to, whether we're talking about real estate agents or affordable housing or anything, the Federal Reserve, inflation, and trying to control everything. If you look at them, like if you really look at that pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and at the top is really in enlightenment, which is a whole different conversation. But if we as business owners and investors and in our conversations would really just study that pyramid of the basic human needs, food, water, shelter, and then as we escalate up that, I mean, even just picking a business that you want to go into, if you look at the base of a pyramid, which is the foundation, and, I constantly come back to whether it's affordable housing or HVAC or whatever, being in a business that humans need on a day-to-day basis is a much better opportunity than something that somebody wants. And so as you scale up the ladder of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's really just changed my positioning around how I think through everything. Because if you're looking at basic human needs that everybody needs and wants, I mean, even just from a simple entrepreneurship standpoint and taking it through that filter, is this business that I'm wanting to launch? I mean, even back to TikTok, where does TikTok fall on this pyramid? Self-esteem, love and belonging. Like, we're talking about all of this stuff with people, if TikTok gets shut down, how many people are
on the pyramid?
Yeah. It's like, honestly, if you really just study this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I'm telling you, it'll change the way you think about it. But what brought it up for me was really just, this is what I kind of broached the subject on last week. I actually think just from a real estate perspective, real estate is going to continue to perform well. And the one thing that I was really pondering on, real estate prices have gone up, rents have gone up too, but not at the same parallel. Visual Capitalist has a really great chart on this, actually, about the disparity. We might have brought it up on a previous episode, but the disparity of rents or the cost of housing versus income. And it's just, this gap has just increased so substantially. And as a real estate investor, I've really struggled with this because it's like, what's a good deal? What's a bad deal? How do we know what the future looks like, especially with tying it back to what we were talking about with the Fed? Are rates going to go up, down? Aaron, I love what you said earlier about if the Fed would just say, hey, we're staying put, then it gives us a baseline to talk about. But when you think about this from a real estate perspective, the point that I was bringing up last week, and Matty, I actually put Tim, if you can pull up the chart that I put in there, the Visual Capitalist chart on the 7 tech companies and where they've, what their price point has gone. This is a great reinforcement to what I was saying, because I actually think that the reason why certain companies, and this is the Magnificent Seven, but even if you look at this chart, why is NVIDIA skyrocketing? And then, I think we've got a lot of companies in the middle, but then even looking at Tesla. And I don't know if we want to open this can of worms right now, but I think there's, a lot of reasons why Tesla's stock is dropping. But even if you just look at this, I actually think, based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as people start tightening their pocketbooks, and Aaron, you've talked about this forever, like the spending just keeps going and credit cards going up and up. It can't go on forever. So when people start tightening up their pocketbooks, where are they going to cut first? Well, if you look back at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they're going to cut up on those areas that don't matter as much. And I think at the end of the day, food, water, shelter is going to take less of a cut. And so my point that I brought up briefly before was that I actually think that real estate is going to do fine and rents are going to have to catch up. And I actually think that people are going to pay their rent and they're going to pay their mortgage and they're going to start cutting other things first. So my point in bringing this up was, if you're in a business that is a discretionary business, I think we need to be watching out. And I actually think that it builds the case that I think real estate's going to do well long term.
Yeah, the concept of if they ever decide to start cutting off people's spending ability, then what are people going to spend their money on? And and so you said food, water, shelter is the bottom of the pyramid, and that's like the first need that people need. The funny thing is, I think that actually, as sad as it is, transportation, so like having a vehicle and like having internet are actually in that bottom tier now, which is crazy to think of. Like internet is a utility like water. Now, if you actually don't have access to internet compared to people that do, like your
Major
chance,
disadvantage.
it's different. It's like third world country for real. So I think food, water, shelter. Yes. I think transportation and access to the internet. Crazy to even say that out loud, but that's important as shelter, but it is like the, because of the way that our world works. And maybe some people are arguing with me with that, but I think it's interesting thing about that. That's where people will spend their money. So when you absolutely, when you don't have access to credit and you don't have access to be able to borrow money from somebody. And I mean, the other cool thing that we do have is like the Uber economy, the DoorDash economy. Like if you absolutely need your cell phone bill and you drive Uber for a week, like in the evenings, you're going to get your cell phone bill paid for. There's like, we have this hustle economy that you can't just scrounge up. If I need 10 grand by tomorrow, I mean, I'm calling you guys, but you can't just scrounge it up in the Uber DoorDash world.
Yeah.
But if you need a few $100 this week to like cover something, to cover like the food, housing, shelter thing, you can. And just about 95% of Americans have the ability to go fill that. So it's an interesting point to go back to that if stuff gets cut off, what will they spend it on? It's not going to be concerts. It's not going to be boats. But it's funny when economies are bad, but credit is available. People will spend the money on concerts and restaurants to make themselves feel better about the fact that they're getting screwed. So it's a fine line. Credit needs to get cut off first, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, talking about maybe some debt and some credit, do we want to carve out a couple more minutes for the personal loan debt example that you had kind of shared a little bit earlier, and maybe give some context to what it is, why it was interesting to you, and why it matters to anybody else?
I think it is really interesting. I think it's a great thing to add on to that because I think it's maybe a clue that, like, in one sense, debt is starting to get shut off, and in another, it's not shut off yet, but it's popping out and it's creating these opportunities for people to get taken advantage of, or new business plans. Heck, I could see it from both sides of the deal. So a friend of mine, essentially, unemployed right now, in between jobs, out of credit card debt, has bills to pay, like rent, like car payment, like probably some drinks at the bar, probably food, all sorts of things. But they have bills to pay. They have no income, and essentially they needed a loan. They needed a loan to be able to make payments, and they start applying online at like a lot of the instant kind of payday loan type stuff. And 3 out of 4 were denials for I don't really know why as reasons. They still had their most recent pay stub, and the pay stub didn't say they weren't employed anymore. It's still their most recent pay stub. And, applying at several different places, and 3 of 4 said, no, you're not eligible for a loan. And then the 4th said, like, hey, we can give you a $3,000 loan in an hour. Like right now, we can pay you $3,000. And here's your pay schedule and your payback schedule. And I saw the payback schedule, and it was like this, it was a few $100s a month for like the next 3 years, which was essentially like you get a $3,000 loan today. It's actually reduced to $2,700 in like 4 or 5 days when your first payment's due, right? Like your first payment's due in a few days. So instead of getting a $3,000 loan, you're really getting a $2,700 or $2,600. It was just this drastic number of realizing it was what if there was no interest would take 10 payments was instead going to be 36 payments. And the amount of interest and the amount of pay and the answer, I was like, that is a really, really bad deal. Right. But the answer was like, well, I got to take it. And then at first they got approved for $1,000. It was a better rate. And they're like, yeah, but that's for less. Like I need 3,000 instead of the 1,000. So the 1,000 was like paying a 20% interest on a payday loan, which was a lot. But the 3,000 was like paying 150% interest, which should be illegal in my mind. And so, one, it shows that with the world we have right now, there are business opportunities to take advantage of, maybe. That credit isn't getting cut off all the way because there are going to be more people that kind of sneak in for the last minute No, but they have to know there's a very little chance of getting paid back. So I don't even know how they do that paper or what the investment strategy is, or if it's like, no, you're just going to, the interest rate's so high, they're counting on getting the first 10 payments. And then after that, they're just going to lean the person and maybe get some more later on it. But yeah, so expenses aren't cut off yet, but it is getting a little bit more intense out there for people, or for some people. You guys think it should be legal, illegal? Do you think now, again, I'm the same guy at the beginning of this call that said free capital should be able to do its thing.
Right. I was just going to say that.
So should we just, so part of me goes, okay, if somebody is willing to say yes to it, I'll line up and start lending money at that.
Yeah. I mean, and then it becomes somewhat of a philosophical debate of where do you cross the threshold of, being predatory or not, right? If somebody says, I'll pay 150%, on this over X amount of time because I need it that bad, even though they know it's not a good financial decision for them over the long term, but it solves a short-term problem. Or what if that person's not sound of mind? Or what if the argument is that person doesn't have the financial acuity to know that they're being taken advantage of, and it seems like it's solving their struggle and their challenge today? I think that's where it's a very interesting discussion when it comes to these things, right? Because how many times could on paper, I've had people go, you bought the house for what? Yeah. And I said, yeah, well, they decided that was a win for them. How is that a win for them when you got it for X and then you sold it for Y and then you made all this money and they didn't? And I said, at the end of the day, when my price meets their level of motivation and it solves their problem, that's where we create a win-win, whether I made more money or not. And so I think that there's all kinds of those discussions out there in life of, if somebody's winning, does the other person have to be losing? Or is it, hey, their financial stress and what that was bringing to their life was way more important to them than what they were actually leaving on the table because it solved the problem, right? I don't know what the one size fits all answer would be to that. But I think in general, there's so many of these theoretical discussions and situations in whether it's college loans, whether it's personal loans, whether it's selling a house, whether it's negotiating a commission. That's where this free and open market creates latitude for individuals to have autonomy to make decisions that are, in their opinion, the best for them going forward. Now, whether they have all the resources and the education and the knowledge to, warrant that being a right or a wrong decision for them, it's individual for each person. There's been so many times where they could have made way more money going a different route, but that's not what was important to them. So, it's an interesting dialogue, I think, to be having. And I'm in the same camp as you. This open, free capitalist market, I think, ultimately creates the best landscape for finding win-wins where people choose to opt in based on what they think is the best decision for them. And it's no place for me or you to tell them what is the right decision for them or not based on our own opinion.
Yeah. If Mike wanted to borrow $100,000 from me and say, I'll pay you back 300. No, but really, like, if you're talking to there is this other part of that moral thing. If they're an accredited investor and they're smart and they're like, hey, this is how badly I need it, and this is how much I'm willing to pay, I think it's also a different conversation for where they know or not.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting too, at the end of the day, just even back to like free market. And I mean, we've been talking about this with interest rates and everything else. Like, 6% interest rate seems really high, but the reality is, like, is it or isn't it? And even with this conversation, I mean, I would go borrow money at 10, 12, 14% all day long if I can make a spread on that. And, I think I was talking with Doug Ottersberg, who's another GoBundance guy. And, he's been in the manufactured housing industry forever. And one of the challenges, again, even just back to, the Dodd-Frank bill and all of that kind of changed the manufactured housing lending forever. There's always some bad actors that do some negative things and take advantage of people. And then we set these rules and regulations that, change everything. But the reality is, like, if somebody needs to borrow $3,000 and they're a friend and they've got a good track record, I've got a mentor that used to talk about the 3 C's: character, collateral, and credit. And actually, he always said to me that the credit is the least concern of his. It's the character and the collateral. And if you just look at that, just bringing it back to basic real estate investing, character, collateral, and credit. Well, if somebody doesn't have character, they don't have any collateral, and they have no credit, I mean, why would anybody loan them money? And so, should the government get involved in that and dictate what somebody decides to lend them money for? That's a risk. That's a risk conversation that I have to look at as the lender. I brought this up, and I think this is really cool, but I've got a friend, Chris Harder, that's launching an app right now, and they've gotten a ton of funding for this, but it's a fintech app called Frello. And what's really cool about this for, people that need to borrow the money, which I'm guessing our audience is probably not in that camp, but what's going to be cool about this from an investment standpoint is it's kind of like what's the swipe right app, like the dating app? I forget what it's called. I've been married for 25 years. Tinder. It's like Tinder. For money. So people that need a loan, they go on there, they fill out their profile, and the app regulates the amount of money they can borrow because they don't have so they're not doing a hard credit pull. What they do is they check your bank account. They're using some app just like Affirm would do. Have you guys seen Affirm? So if you want to buy a Peloton, you can finance it through Affirm, and it doesn't actually do a hard pull. So you're not actually applying through Experian. It's just what Affirm does is it checks your bank account. It checks the amount of deposits, and they have these algorithms that kind of gives you the likelihood to pay. And that's what they base it off of. So if you need a loan on Frello, you can go in there and you can say, hey, I need a $500 loan. When you first get started, you can't borrow more than $500 or $700 until your payback score goes up. But what's cool about this app is that the borrower puts what they need the money for. And then as an investor, you go in there and you deposit money into your account, and you can look at all these loans, and there's an algorithm you can filter based on what type of loans you want to do and the scores. And then when a borrower puts it's kind of like eBay for lenders and borrowers, they put the loan in there, and then investors go in there and bid on it. You say, okay, I'll loan you $1,000 for 6 weeks, and I'm going to charge you $300. And then another investor could come in and say, I'll do a loan for 6 weeks. I'll charge you $150. So it creates this marketplace for borrowers and lenders. It's pretty freaking cool because it keeps the free market open, and you've got investors that are bidding on lenders' loans. And if a lender has, here's what's cool too. They have an insurance policy that you can choose as an investor to buy it or not. And so if you do a loan, you might pay $35 to insure your loan. And so they have an insurance pool too. And as long as you buy the insurance, if your loan goes bad, they won't give you the interest and all the money you were going to make, but they'll give you your principal back. But they won't give it to you in cash. It's in credits toward future loans. It's just a really cool concept.
It's not the insurance is like a partial loss. I could see that getting, it'd be a brilliant idea, right? The bringing people closer together, through tech. There's some really fun tech stuff I'm looking forward to tell you guys about over the next probably month or two. Being in Austin, I've got a buddy with a cell company that's one of the new cell companies that won't be recording data on the phones. I wanted to talk to you guys about that, see what you thought about it, and a bunch of other stuff. I think today we got to cover some really, fun, interesting topics. It's the highlight of my week to get to chat with you guys. Matty, you have anything you want to add to take us home? I think the stuff we talked about, I always learn from you guys. I'm always excited about what the conversation is going to be, but what should we finish with here?
Yeah, I figured, being that all of us and many of our listeners have teams or have businesses or, are trying to build up more trust in a relationship, right? I think if there's more than one of you that are collectively working towards some type of goal, then I think this little graph in discussion will be valuable to you. So in our accountability group, we've been running for 9+ years. And essentially, this was the model that we based a lot of our frameworks around, which is the Lencioni model. So Patrick Lencioni, who wrote the 5 dysfunctions of a team, he talked about this particular model around the 5 main problems that plague an organization or plague a team if they are not addressed properly. And so you can see here, you guys can see my screen right on the right, the absence of trust, the fear of conflict, the lack of commitment, avoidance of accountability, and inattention to results. And when you think about that, right, absence of trust, if your team doesn't trust you or each other, then you guys aren't going to collectively be able to create your best work and the best outcomes together. If you guys have a fear of conflict, I don't want to ruffle anybody's feathers, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, healthy constructive conflict is a necessity to having teams grow and evolve and connect and expand in a way that can create massive results and outcome. A lack of commitment. Good work takes commitment, right? Without it, it can really bring the rest of the team down, just one person. Avoidance of accountability. I think we all know, being in accountability groups and being, highly accountable individuals, if my feet are held to the fire, I am statistically and guaranteed to get much better results than if I don't have anybody, holding me accountable. And then obviously an inattention to results. And what he talks about is when you focus around building the foundation of your team on trust, it allows you to create spaces where you guys can have healthy conflict, healthy discussions, resolution, which then is going to create clarity, alignment, and commitments that allow you as a group to hold each other to higher standards of accountability, right? And ultimately, as a result of that, your output, the outcomes, the results are much more productive. And this was something that I kind of went over with my accountability group in terms of our, commercial real estate mastermind, because we got all of our accountability groups and pods, and laying this foundation as a precedent for any organization or any team that is maybe looking to elevate and take things to that next level. This foundational model right here of a cohesive team, trust, conflict, commitment, accountability, and results, all of those things being present, and not just present, prioritized, actually forcing the issue in these areas is going to be something that allows the group to fuse into something so much stronger than if it's just a bunch of bodies getting in a room talking about things without any purpose, passion, or intensity behind it. So I wanted to share and leave this with our listeners. If you guys aren't able to see this, head over to the YouTube channel. Of course, hit that subscribe button if you haven't subscribed yet. But check out this model, and you can always just look up the Lencioni model, Lencioni. Before we wrap up today, did you guys have any thoughts, or did this spur any takeaways or ahas around how this model might be beneficial to anything that you're working on right now?
I want to add in the before Mike closes us out. If you're not on YouTube, you should be able to see some of the stuff that we put on here. Most of the time, it's just us looking at each other and laughing. But occasionally, we do get to pull up some of these articles and some of these charts. And today, it was important because as they were coming up, and I was trying to kind of visualize, the way, right? So the Lencioni model of results, like what's really important in business is what it's saying. Like, so the 5 things, results. Are you looking at the actual results? Like when you're hiring somebody with anything, like if your goal is to get, 10 sales, are you getting 10 sales? Accountability. Are you actually asking, did you get the 10 sales? Commitment. Like, are you committed to get 10 sales? Like whatever the goal is, I think it comes down to so much stuff. And then conflict and trust is kind of that base of the team. So like if all the team is saying like, no, we're all supposed to get 10 sales, each one of us are supposed to have it. And how does that work? And I know it's more complicated than that, but being able to take just like any piece of that, I haven't actually seen this model before. So like nobody's brought this to me before, but when I think about like the 5 things, I think what's funny is in my businesses, we think a lot about results and accountability. Hey, I told them this is what you're supposed to do, and you either did it or you didn't. Right. But I think where I probably have skipped is the commitment, the conflict, and the trust. And when I see those at the bottom of the pyramid, maybe part of the reason people might not hit their goals is they didn't commit to the goals. They didn't agree. I gave them a goal and they didn't agree to it.
Yeah.
Or I gave them a goal and there's conflict or trust issues that create that. So I think this is kind of an interesting building block, saying maybe some business people, I'm a slightly above average business guy that is doing stuff in the wrong order, maybe when it comes to this model. So it did spark some stuff for me.
Yeah, a lot of people have this model flipped upside down. So it's a good visual, and it's a good reminder that if you can get all of these ingredients into a team environment, things can get pretty powerful and pretty fun too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Aaron summed it up well, but I love the 5 dysfunction of a team. Like, I mean,
It's a great book.
the audio, I've probably listened to that book 15, 20 times. Like, it really shaped like my thinking. I mean, way back in probably 2000, I don't know what year it was, but when I was running my HVAC company. So I love this. And if you listen to that book or read the book, like you can just see so many of your pitfalls as a leader. And like you said, having that triangle flipped upside down. Um, I actually wrote a thesis when I was in jail when I was 18. I don't know why. But I like wrote this whole paper. I was just sitting in jail thinking about my life. And Karen and I, joke about this all the time, but it was responsibility versus authority. And a lot of times, we want to take authority, but not the responsibility. And vice versa. We want to hold people responsible, but we don't want to give them the authority. And it just, when I read Patrick's book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and it just so brought me back to that, because a lot of times, like you said, with the triangle upside down, as leaders, we're really good at holding people accountable and responsible, but we're not really great at building the basis and the foundation of, giving them the ability to make decisions and all of that. And I think that starts with trust, right? Why do we not want people making decisions? Because we don't trust them. But in reality, we can't trust them because we haven't given them the information that they need, or trained them, or even spent enough time with them to know whether we trust them. And so it's really not an issue of they don't have the ability, and we're not going to give them the authority because we don't trust them. So this has kind of shaped my thinking for a long time. But again, as leaders, like we want to hold people responsible, but we don't want to give them authority.
As we wrap up today, I think to me too, it just reaffirms how fulfilling it is to have a highly functional team. And team in asterisks or quotes, right? Like I look at you guys, this pod, right? And what we do here on this show as a team, the fact that we have the ability and a space where we trust each other, that we can have conflict and call each other out, that we can challenge each other on different viewpoints, that we can create commitments that we know we can hold each other accountable to. And ultimately we get much better results, more optimized results than if we didn't have those variables in this type of environment. So whether it's in your marriage, it's with your kids, your family team, it's with your friend team, it's with your podcast team, it's with your business team, whatever it is, I think just a good reminder to, self-reflect, take audit, and think about how, if you don't have some of these things, you can incorporate them in. But overall, a great discussion today. Thank you guys for letting me drive. And again, be sure to check out the podcast on the King's Table YouTube channel if you want to watch all of our faces made for radio. We got you covered. And of course, now we are on all the podcasting platforms. So all we ask is if you guys enjoy the show, we've been getting so many people tagging us, sharing out the sound bites, sharing the podcast with people. Reach out to any of us on our social media platforms. Amuchastegui's putting out content every single day. Mike's putting out content every day. I'm putting out, Ash is putting out content every day. So we want to continue connecting with you guys and adding value in any way we can in between shows. But all we ask is that if you enjoy what we put out, just leave a review, whether it's on YouTube, leaving a comment. It's on any of the podcasting platforms you guys enjoy listening to this show on. That's how we continue to share and spread this message. We just want to say thank you guys for tuning in each and every week. We got a great topics and show for you guys already teed up next week. Lots to cover, lots to lean in on. And until then, we will see you guys on next week's episode.
See you next time, everybody.
Later.